We started things off on this topic in my last video, so we're here today to finish it. In these videos, we're going through every single NBA team, identifying the most overrated player on each squad. We went through all of the teams in the Eastern Conference in my last video, so if you missed that, make sure to go back and watch it after you watch this one, but that means today, we'll be going through the teams in the Western Conference to finish things off. I know the term overrated has a big negative connotation behind it, so before we dive in, I need to emphasize that the players included on this list are not players that I believe are bad by any means, they're just simply viewed by most fans and media members in a brighter light than their play actually warrants. Before we start though, it turns out a good amount of you watching aren't even subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoy the content, consider hitting the subscribe button, as not only does it help out a ton, but I'd also very much appreciate it. Now with that being said, let's begin. We'll be going in alphabetical order, so the first team up is the Dallas Mavericks, and their most overrated player is Christian Wood. Wood is a highly skilled big man on offense who spaces the floor decently well and is a pretty good partner for Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving in the pick and roll, but his defense is very worrisome and the Mavericks perform almost 3 points worse with him on the court. His numbers on paper are objectively good and he's a productive player to have off the bench, but the Mavericks have fallen off of a cliff this year defensively and Wood has definitely contributed to that. Next up is the Denver Nuggets, and their most overrated player is Michael Porter Jr. Porter Jr. is a very talented scorer who is ready to shoot the ball on a moment's notice, and there isn't a shot that he sees that he doesn't like. He's scoring about 17 points per game this year incredibly efficiently from both the field and from three, and he benefits from playing alongside Nikola Jokic, who sets him up for good looks regularly, but his defense is starting to cause some concerns as the playoffs approach, and the Nuggets coaching staff has even gone as far as experimenting with different lineups and giving him fewer minutes. Next up is the Golden State Warriors, and their most overrated player is Jordan Poole. Poole broke out last season, and because of the fact that his playstyle is incredibly flashy and fun, he was quickly starting to attract a big fan base. He was being called the next Splash Brother, and the Warriors in the offseason even chose to commit to him with a long-term max contract extension, but in hindsight, I'm not quite sure he's a max-level player. He's scoring about 20 points this year, but his shot selection is pretty questionable, and he shoots below average efficiency-wise, while struggling as a defender too. Up next is the Houston Rockets, and their most overrated player is Kevin Porter Jr. The Rockets are not only a rebuilding team losing a lot of games, but the brand of basketball that they play has come under fire quite a bit, as they've been labeled by some as an AAU team-esque style that they play, and Kevin Porter Jr. definitely contributes to it. They lack structure, the brand of basketball is pretty selfish, and despite the production looking good on paper for him, it is more than likely pretty hollow. Next up is the Los Angeles Clippers, and their most overrated player is Bones Hyland. Hyland is yet another example of a player with a pretty fun and flashy play style, and when he makes a highlight, everyone's talking about it and starting to say things like he deserves more minutes, but while he's capable of making those big plays, he still has way too many flaws. He is genuinely one of the worst defensive players in the NBA, and he's far too inconsistent on offense to justify trusting with a big role at this point in time. Up next is the Los Angeles Lakers, and their most overrated player is D'Angelo Russell. When Russell Westbrook was the team's point guard, he got blamed for a lot of the team's issues, and while he's not blameless in the matter, he was often scapegoated way too much. Bringing in D'Angelo Russell to replace him on the Lakers has made the fans optimistic again, but Russell isn't the massive upgrade that many think he is, as his weaknesses as a consistent decision-maker and defender were two of the biggest gripes they had with Westbrook. Next up is the Memphis Grizzlies, and their most overrated player is Dillon Brooks. Brooks has been making headlines for all of the wrong reasons lately, as he somehow finds a way to beef with players on every single team that the Grizzlies play. He's an instigator with a lot to say, and his play doesn't quite back his words up. He's a poor shooter of the ball from both the field and from three, and he's only scoring about 14 points a night. While he is an objectively solid defender out on the perimeter, he's going down the Patrick Beverley route of bringing attention to himself because of his mouth more than his play. Up next is the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the most overrated player there is Rudy Gobert. Gobert was brought to Minnesota with the goal of giving their defense a boost and elevating themselves to contender status, and they did so by trading away almost every draft pick and asset they had. But as the end of the season approaches, he has yet to prove worthy of that kind of price tag. He's still one of the better rim protectors in the league, but at 30 years old, he's starting to show signs of slowing down in that regard. Next up is the New Orleans Pelicans, and their most overrated player is Zion Williamson. I have to come clean and admit that I've contributed to the overrating of Zion because I can't help but be mesmerized by his dominance when he's healthy and playing, but the fact of the matter is that thus far he just can't be trusted to stay healthy, and you can't be considered one of the best players in the league if you're only playing 30 games a year. Next up, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, and their most overrated player is Lu Dort. Dort is a great story, he's an easy player to root for, and he's objectively good and helpful for this young Thunder team on the rise. He's very similar to Avery Bradley, who was a good perimeter defender that got a bit overrated in that regard, and then offensively, Dort is far too inconsistent and inefficient to be trusted to playmake regularly. Next up is the Phoenix Suns, and their most overrated player is Deandre Ayton. Ayton had a very strong playoff run 2 years ago, helping the Suns make the finals, and got anointed as the next great center on the rise, but since then, it's debatable whether or not he's even improved at all, and after also being paid a max contract this offseason, he hasn't lived up to the elevated expectations. He's effective in the mid-range, has nice touch around the basket, he rebounds well, and plays above average defense, but he can shrink in big moments, and has a reputation for being a bit soft. Up next, we have the Portland Trail Blazers, and their most overrated player is Anfernee Simons. The Blazers started the season red-hot shooting the ball and were firmly in the playoff race, but as the season has progressed, they've slipped further and further down the standings, and it's because guys like Simons have regressed back to the mean. He's a promising young shooter that loves to launch threes, but defensively he's a nightmare and isn't quite ready to be a go-to option for a playoff team yet. Next up is the Sacramento Kings, and their most overrated player is Kevin Huerter. I'll be honest, it was hard to find a truly overrated player on the Kings with how well the team has been playing this season, so Huerter kind of got the nod by default. He played a big role in the Hawks' run to the conference finals a few years ago, and while his ability to serve as a knockdown shooter and valuable secondary scoring threat, I've seen a few instances of him being ranked amongst the best young guards in the league, when realistically he's at least a tier below those guys. Up next is the San Antonio Spurs, and their most overrated player is Keldon Johnson. This is another example of a team being difficult to pick an overrated player from, but Johnson's production has skyrocketed this year now that he's the #1 option. The Spurs are tanking for Victor Wembanyama, and Johnson has definitely taken promising strides forward, but it's difficult for me to truly buy into the numbers that he's putting up because they're pretty hollow given the circumstances. He can freely shoot the ball at will because of the lack of expectations, so we'll see how he fares moving forward as the Spurs bounce back. And finally, the last team in the Western Conference is the Utah Jazz, and their most overrated player is Jordan Clarkson. Clarkson's been a solid sixth man for most of his career, and this year he earned a starting spot on the team, which has resulted in him scoring a career-high 20 points per game. The ball is in his hands more, and he's shooting more shots per game than he ever has, so this was bound to happen, but it doesn't necessarily mean he's better now that he's still shooting the ball below league average from the field and from three, so it feels just like a result of a higher volume, not actual improvement. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below which players you think are a bit overrated from these teams. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.